ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see.
Hello, welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This week, as part of our Halloween spooktacular of horror movies from yesteryear that we love, we are revisiting Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Hey, but you know the drill. Before we head out to talk about Bram Stoker's Dracula, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and did that. Just hit the subscribe button, as well as that little bell next to it. That way you are notified every single time we release a new video. And hey, while you're there, go ahead and like the video. And as always, we'd like to remind you, Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, so you have been warned. James?
Okay, so yes, this is a brand new little something that we thought we would do because it's Halloween, or it's coming up to. Yeah, and you know what? Already I'm realizing that we missed a trick, and we could have dressed up as the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt or something like that in order to.
I do have the spiders. This. I've got the spiders, and I got the candles. Or yeah.
I'm there. I'm in the crypt. But yeah, we just thought that we would talk about some of the horror movies that we love, some of our favorites, some that we might be revisiting or are actually revisiting as it is almost Halloween. And what better film to start off with than, I think, personally, one of my favorites, if not my favorite version of Dracula.
James, I love this version of Dracula. This movie came out the year Tammy and I were married. And so it's hard to believe it's been 30 years since Francis Ford Coppola came out with his rendition of the classic tale of Dracula. And even though he gives us the actual tale of Bram Stoker, hence why his name is even included, because Coppola really stays faithful to the narrative that Stoker brought. And you know, so much of vampire lore that we have comes from this one novel, and to see a really good rendition of this novel brought to life, I love this film.
Yeah, no, me too. I feel exactly the same way about it. You know, we've had a lot of Dracula movies in the past, you know, Todd Browning's classic from Universal Studios in the 1930s, and then you've got Christopher Lee from Hammer in the 50s. But, you know, they take incredible liberties with Bram Stoker's novel. You know, they take the bare bones of that and then do their own thing, as much for, you know, budgetary reasons and time constraints as anything else. I mean, here, Francis Ford Coppola, early 90s, you know, he had just done Godfather Part 3. And although that had been a little bit kind of rocky, it was, you know, it had got a lot of Oscar nominations and, you know, and I think it had done kind of okay, even if people were a little bit sort of sniffy about it. And so basically he had free reign. And everybody agreed it was about time that we did a big, lavish, faithful, star-studded adaptation. And the cast in this, you know, is packed. You got Gary Oldman, Wynona Ryder, Anthony Hopkins, Keanu Reeves, Tom Waits, and it just kind of goes on and on and on from there. And what I love about this film is just how much it leans into the kind of the gothic sensibilities of the novel, the lush and lavish settings. You know, those costumes are incredible. The production design is deliberately kind of over the top. The colors just really kind of pop, and it's simultaneously even, it's not afraid to be violent when it needs to be and sexy when it needs to be, and it all kind of comes together in this great kind of operatic, over the top, just celebration of everything Dracula.
Yeah, even minor cast members like Richard Grant playing the psychiatrist just lends such a degree of.
Do you mean Richard E. Grant? Because I think you have to say. You said Richard Grant. I think you have to say Richard E. Grant. I think that's his stage.
You're right. It's Richard E. Grant, who I was first introduced to him through another classic horror film, Warlock. I don't know if you remember Warlock.
I'm not sure if I've seen Warlock, actually.
Oh, with Julian Sands. Oh, that is
That's right.
Wonderful film. He has to stop Julian Sands, who is just evil incarnate. I have never seen evil personified on screen as well as in that film. And so that's when I became a bit of a Richard E. Grant admirer.
For me, he will always be Withnail in Withnail and I, which is a film I think that's come up in conversation.
You told me about that. Yes, yes.
We must do that at some point.
We'll have to watch it together sometime, maybe, and then review it.
And there is a drinking game that you can play.
Oh, okay.
whilst watching it. We digress.
But we digress. We digress. Yeah, there's such wonderful, strong cast in this film. However, and this goes back to initial reviews 30 years ago of Keanu Reeves and Wynona Ryder in this movie. And the funny thing is, I'm a fan of both of these actors. And now rewatching the film after all these decades, I still have to say, yeah, they could have cast those two roles a little bit better. What say you?
Keanu Reeves definitely. He was yet to find his feet as a performer. I think he'd done Bill and Ted, and that's kind of about it. He'd done Point Break, which I think is a wonderful film. But here he's doing a period film with an English accent. He's very much out of his comfort zone, and it shows. He looks terrified, and not for the reasons that he should be terrified in this movie. Not because he's staying at Castle Dracula in Transylvania, but because he doesn't know what to do or how to do it, and it's just very stiff, very wooden. And it's a shame because he is not here the Keanu Reeves that we have all come to know and love.
Well, and it's interesting, Coppola is not the only person who made this mistake with Keanu Reeves in a British production, because Kenneth Branagh did it in Much Ado About Nothing, casting Keanu Reeves as Denzel Washington's brother, half brother, in the Shakespearean film that he did,
which was right around. It was, I was going to say it's right around the same time,
almost the same year. I was going to say I think they're both in '92. I might be off by a year or so there. So it was interesting that Keanu Reeves was able to captivate both a Coppola and a Branagh to put him into roles that I think everybody who's watched it, you have such powerful casts, such depth and levels of experience in both of those films casts, that, like you said, in both cases, he seems out of his league.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it seems like Coppola really had the pick of everybody he wanted. If you look at everybody that's cast in that movie, they were all riding this crest of, before now unknown sort of stardom in their respective careers. I mean, not least Gary Oldman, who had really only just attracted international attention by playing Lee Harvey Oswald in JFK the year before. I mean, he'd worked his way up through British films, but really this was his first sort of Hollywood starring role. And then Wynona Ryder, she'd been in some teen movies like Heathers and what have you, but then just the year before she'd had a big hit with Edward Scissorhands. And so she was like clearly at the top of the list, and she was supposed to work with Coppola on Godfather Part 3, and then very publicly pulled out at the last minute, and then he had to put his daughter in, Sophia, to play the role of Al Pacino's daughter, and she got slammed for it. And there was a big she broke her contract. Wynona Ryder broke her contract, and there was a big kind of legal furore over it, if I remember it rightly. So it was like, maybe this was like part of the deal. It's like, okay, you can get out of this one, but you have to do this one. And then Anthony Hopkins as well was coming right off the back of his Oscar win for Silence of the Lambs. So it seemed that everybody in the cast was on this crest of success. And maybe for good or ill, that meant that the studios were like, this is the cast you have to have. These are the big names that we have right now. I'm not, you never know how these things work, really.
I'm a Wynona Ryder fan. I've always enjoyed her. In fact, I remember seeing Beetlejuice in the cinema in the 80s when that was her first role, I believe, or a role of any note. And I remember saying to my friend, she's going to be a star one day. She's captivating. She owns the scenes that she's in. And yet, I would almost say that I liked Keanu Reeves in Dracula more than I liked Wynona Ryder. I find her horribly miscast in this. And when she says the line, when Gary Oldman is got this temptation to turn her into a vampire, and he's saying all the reasons why he shouldn't do it because of his love, and she says, take me away from all this death or something. The way she delivers that line every single time, it sends a chill up like that. Why did they put her in this film? Why didn't they put a English actress that would have been much more appropriate in this film?
I think it's just that she was the hottest young name at the time, and they're like, put her in. I mean, one of the things that sort of lingers with me, one of the enduring elements of this film that stays with me, is that unlike in so many other versions of Dracula, here you really see the character in so many different guises. There are so many versions of Dracula, whether it's the dapper gent around, man about town when he arrives in, is it London? I forget. And then, when he's the older sort of aristocratic version of himself in his castle, when Keanu Reeves first comes to visit him, and then obviously there's the full-on vampire bat version of him. There's even a kind of wolfman version that ravishes Sadie Frost in the garden at one point. And you've never had, I think, the money or the ability or and it's at a time when practical effects were still, very much being used. And I think it really just adds to the horror element of the movie. It really just makes the whole thing incredibly ghoulish.
Well, I do know that Coppola, even though CGI was just coming on board, he chose he eschewed any kind of optics in CGI. And so you get a very tactile special effects that's presented in this film. And I like your point about the different versions of the beast, because I was going to say something similarly along those lines. And that subsequently, in the last 30 years since this movie came out, we've gotten the Interview with the Vampires, we've gotten the Twilights, we've gotten the Pretty Boy, the Immortals, and the Vampire Diaries, where vampirism is something that you want. It makes you beautiful, it makes you strong, it makes you desirable. And this movie really reinforces that, no, you're a beast, you're an animal. Anthony Hopkins in the film keeps reiterating this is a beast from the earth. He has renounced God. He is not human. He is not, this is something that is undesirable. And even Gary Oldman himself says this to Wynona Ryder. He doesn't want to bring her into, actually, he hates himself. He hates who he is. And that inner turmoil that Gary Oldman is able to communicate of, yes, I am powerful, I can command the winds, I can command emotions, I can command my environment around me, yet I hate myself because I'm an animal.
Yeah, and there is this sort of tragic, it really plays up the tragic love story element of it. That he is a tortured soul who has been trapped, cursed, to wander the earth in loneliness with a broken heart for all eternity. Of course, Vlad the Impaler is another kind of element of his backstory that's folded in there as well. And and I love all that. At the time, I remember I was a young teenager going to see it, and some of my friends just thought it was that they couldn't handle the camp, really. For a bunch of like 14-year-old boys going to see it, there was a level of theatricality to it and over the top campness to it that you have to pivot slightly in order to digest, shall we say. And I remember some of my mates going, well, they couldn't really get it. They didn't really like it. They didn't, gel with that. They wanted something a bit more straightforward. But every time I see it, I think more and more and more over the years, I really appreciate how far they went with all of that, because that is the stuff that makes the film different. That is from all the other incarnations of it, and sets it apart and actually gives it a kind of timeless quality. Really, that's the stuff that endures, and I think those are the great strengths of the story and of the setting and of the themes. These themes of kind of, there's something always interesting about sort of vampire stories, because it is all about blood, and so it becomes about sort of sex and about sort of the taking of virginity, but it also there's often a kind of a sort of virus element, and there is a kind of, I think, underplayed theme of kind of sort of the AIDS epidemic almost, or just this idea of infection and how it's there bubbling under the surface, and depending on the contact you make with other people, it can be quite dangerous. It was obviously early 90s, and so it was STDs were kind of everywhere at that time, and there is kind of like a little element of that in there that it kind of plays around with. It's just there's these carnal pleasures can be very dangerous as well.
Right. There is the inference that the vampirism is transmitted through sexual contact.
Yes.
Whether even the neck bites are meant to be sexual in nature. And obviously, as you mentioned, when the beast is raping Sadie Frost, that is a powerful image of her being transformed into a vampire herself. And like you said, the metaphor is it ultimately leads to her death.
Yeah, absolutely. She is, it's a little kind of heavy-handed to a degree, but she's the promiscuous, outgoing kind of party girl, if you like, unlike was it Mira?
No. Mina.
Mina, played by Wynona Ryder. And she pays the price for it. She is ravished, and she finds some momentary kind of strength and freedom in that, but ultimately, it's a slippery slope down to her death. And but that's what the story's about. And I like the fact that this film kind of leans into all of that. And it finds the time. There is a kind of carnival-esque quality to the film. Everything is ramped up to 11, and I just enjoy it for that, really.
Well, even Anthony Hopkins' Van Helsing has that camp nature, when he just matter-of-factly says, yes, I cut off her head and I drew a stake through her heart, and now she's dead. I'm sorry, but there it is.
Them's the rules.
Yeah. Sorry. She's become undead. We had to kill her. Sorry. Pass the stake. And so there's that element that I really enjoyed. But I think really what holds this whole film together is Gary Oldman. I love
amazing.
watching his performance in this. He really is able to communicate, and I think he redefined the Dracula role. It went from being the Bela Lugosi kind of, you mentioned it being camp, but it had become I want to suck your blood, whereas Oldman really was able to communicate this tortured soul who did horrific things. And I haven't, me, I love redemption films. And yet I struggled with the redemption at the end of this film, because I'm thinking this little shit has not paid enough for all the murderous mayhem he has wreaked on not only the lives in this film, but as insinuated, he's been doing horrible things for centuries now. I mean, when he gives his brides the baby, it's a heart to be eaten. I'm thinking, the redemption at the end of this film, I want redemption, but this guy has not paid any price.
No, absolutely. And, at the end of the day, that, Dracula isn't going to be sort of forgiven for his crimes or anything, even in death. But I totally agree with you that this all lives or dies on Gary Oldman's performance. It's so versatile for the reasons that we have said. There are so many facets to and incarnations of Dracula that we see here, and he is a monster, and he is a seducer, but he is also this kind of frail and tortured, heartbroken man, as well, and he sells you on all of it. And there are very, very few people, very few performers, I think, who can do that, who would be willing to do that. And I think it's arguably, it's one of his great sort of almost unsung performances, because I think it came so early in his career that people were like, okay, here's the role, we're gonna give you the lead role. But then I don't think it was rewarded perhaps as much as it should have been. Because I think it's truly great, and certainly in his canon, it's right up there.
Well, it's had an impact on future filmmakers too, because you look at even Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement when they did What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, sure.
There are so many ripoffs from this film in that spoof that in fact, when Gary Oldman, says at one point when he's a beast and Mina sees him, don't see me now, and she's hypnotically, she doesn't see him, but when he looks handsome and he's got his John Lennon glasses on, it's like, see me now, and then she turns. And then the spoof, I don't know if you ever seen What We Do in the Shadows, when see me now, and the guy's not looking, so he starts tapping on the window a little bit, see me now.
Well, I think it's great. I mean, I think for anybody sort of who came of age at that time, this is Dracula. This is the version that really kind of struck a chord with people, and it continues to do so as far as I'm concerned, I think.
I was pleasantly surprised when I rewatched it last week how much I still enjoyed this film. It really is. It's a timeless classic. And, I still remember listening to Bram Stoker's Dracula on audio tape one night when my dad had a flooring company, as I mentioned in the past, and we would also do carpet cleaning at movie theaters. Hence, one of my love for films is we used to go to the cinemas for free, and we would carpet clean the cinemas. And I remember one time listening to Bram Stoker's Dracula and the whole Jonathan Harker sequence at the beginning. And I was scared I had to make sure the lights were on. I'm vacuuming. I'm in the cinema alone at about 2 a.m. in the morning, and I'm listening to this. But I'm reminded in watching this again, and I've become more sympathetic to Keanu Reeves over the decades in this role. But the Jonathan Harker character is it's so menacing because you put yourself in this person's position and you can't do anything. And it's slowly dawning on you that you're a prisoner, that you're never going to leave this place, that you're going to be fed on by these brides, that the slow unraveling of the horror that awaits you when you've come just for a business meeting.
Just to sign a mortgage agreement, isn't it? So.
And so the way that this story unfolds is so beautifully told, just from the novel itself. And Coppola has been able to communicate that wonderful novel into this film. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think as we've mentioned, it was in a way that you hadn't really seen before. Mm-hmm. Previous versions had all just kind of stripped the story bare, or just lifted the character completely. I mean, if you look at the Hammer movies, they've got nothing to do with the book at all. Really, they're just like Christopher Lee is amazing, and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing is amazing. But then it's just like the further adventures of these two characters together, squaring off, in sort of Middle England and Middle Europe, and there's nothing of Bram Stoker's book in there. Yeah. I think probably the only other one that comes to mind that is fairly close is you go all the way back to Nosferatu, the silent classic, which is an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, but legally wasn't allowed to be. Mm-hmm. So they changed all the names, and he's called Count Orlok, and the movie's called Nosferatu, but it's totally Dracula. Right. But I think the Bram Stoker estate, sued them, and it was a big thing. But that's, I think, the only other one that really kind of follows most of the major beats of the novel. So in some ways, as the title of the film suggests, this is kind of the definitive adaptation, if you like. It's the only one that really goes through all the steps.
I think they've made some subsequent Dracula movies since then, but they really haven't measured up in a way that's become iconic like this film has. And it would be interesting, because it has been 30 years since this movie's been done, whether they could do a new updated Dracula and bring kind of a new generation this wonderful story.
I'm sure it's only a matter of time. I mean, like you said, they do make Dracula movies all the time, pretty much. And what I liked about this one is they tried to start sort of reboot the whole Universal Monsters catalog with this. So you got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed by Kenneth Branagh, who we were just talking about, or hot on the heels of the success of this, and it didn't do nearly so well, and they kind of sort of gave up after that. You got the contemporary set Wolfman movie Wolf with Jack Nicholson, but it had nothing to do with the Wolfman. And then it wasn't really until, and then there's a fairly decent version of the Wolfman that came out in 2010 with Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins, if I remember rightly, and Emily Blunt, which is okay. But after that, it was this movie. You remember when The Mummy came out, the Tom Cruise Mummy movie, and they
crashed and burned,
and they announced that they were launching this dark universe. It was going to be this whole shared universe, like MCU style, of all of the Universal monsters, and you had Russell Crowe in there as Dr. Jekyll, and the idea was that they were going to do them all, and they even cast everybody, and there's one photo out there of them all sitting together. You got like Javier Bardem was going to be the Frankenstein's monster, Johnny Depp was going to be the Invisible Man, Angelina Jolie was going to be Bride of Frankenstein. They cast all these roles. They, I guess, signed contracts. There was a movie before that called Dracula Untold, with Bill Nighy and now I can't remember who it is that played. Hang on, I'm going to look it up quickly.
Bill Nighy was in the Underworld, the original Underworld movie too.
Yeah, he's like the head of the
there. That was a good movie. I thought the original.
Right, so Dracula Untold stars Luke Evans as Dracula, and the idea is that it's kind of a prequel, kind of a contemporary set thing, and it was supposed to launch this whole kind of universe. It even ends with a kind of tease, a kind of stinger, kind of going, okay, there's going to be more of these. And then it died in the water, and then a couple of years later they brought out The Mummy and said, okay, forget all of that, now we're really doing it. And then that died in the water as well. And so it's fascinating how badly they've screwed all this up, really.
Because take the classic characters, you've got to do them well. I thought Stephen Moffat's rendition, that 3-part miniseries of Dracula, they did a couple years back. I thought that was quite good. I enjoyed that a lot. Obviously Stephen Moffat, who's brought us Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and was showrunner for Doctor Who. And so I like a lot of what he brings. And I think it's Mark Gatiss also is the co-writer.
Yes, it's those two. Yeah.
And I would recommend any of our viewers out there, let me know what you think about that 3-part series, because it was a little polarizing, but I enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, because they did kind of mix some of it into the present day and some of it in the past, and they did some kind of interesting things with it. But it does fascinate me how sort of they've managed to kind of screw this up again and again in recent years, to the point where if you look at these movies, this one in particular, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein isn't bad. It's not as bad as its reputation.
Right.
That since then they've been completely unable to sort of reboot all of this. They're currently trying to reboot them again, but on a much smaller, far more horror inflected scale. Do you remember The Invisible Man that came out a couple of years ago with Elizabeth Moss?
Yes.
Which was kind of more of a slasher movie almost, where she's being tormented by an over controlling lover who is also a scientist and develops this it was
more like a psychological thriller.
Yeah, and I think that was pretty interesting. And I think the same director is now going on and doing a version of The Wolfman with Ryan Gosling, I think, but I don't know what form that is going to take. So I mean, these movies and these characters are always going to be out there, but but I think the future of them is in this sort of recontextualizing and reinvention and contemporizing them over and over again. But so I think that's what was so good about this one, is that it was an opportunity to take a step back and go, what we really need to do is go back to the source material and do a full-on kind of gothic romance. And I think that's why I love it so much.
Well, that's one of our Halloween spooktacular recommendations. Gary Oldman and Bram Stoker and Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula. What did you think of the film? We've obviously given our thoughts on it, but is it one of your Halloween favorites? Is it a movie you go back to? We'd love to hear your comments in the comment box below. And don't forget, James and I are on social media. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram, and the links to how you can do that will also be in the description box below. James?
That's right. Let us know which are your favorite on-screen incarnations of Dracula. Not vampire movies, but Dracula movies specifically. Also, let us know what you're going to be watching for Halloween. Any good horror recommendations out there that we should be aware of, please do let us know. But in the meantime, a very happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
You ought to be in pictures all